Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm meadsyreplays. Welcome back to the channel. Now, in this video, slightly different. It is a Did You Know video. Now, there's two things. There's basically two things, but we're going to look at three things. But overall, it's just two things that we're going to Did You Know at. So, we're going to start off with this tank here, the Ram 2. Now, I love this tank. It's a tier 5 tank, and I used to love this tank. I picked it up for free back in the day when I won a contest. I think she used to do these countdown contests, and if you kill a certain person, you won a Ram 2. So I managed to win this years ago. But what is so unique about the Ram 2? And it's not just the Ram 2. There are a couple of tanks out there. There's a couple of tanks like the Ram 2, and we're going to look at the two in particular. There was more, but you know, now there's not. So basically, you know that there is all these nations out there. You know, you've got the American, you've got the Chinese, you've got British, you've got a load of different nations, German. And then, of course, Wargaming got the European nation, where there's a few certain tanks in there from different nations that we never had, like Swedish. We had, of course, we've got Polish, Italian, etc., etc. Now, this tank kind of sits on its own, not just on its own. There is another tank, and there was another tank before they introduced some of the other tanks. So we used to have a Swedish tank, that was introduced years and years ago, way before the European tech tree. And of course, it was the only Swedish tank in the game, way before that they introduced these tech trees. Now, the Ram 2 and another tank, which we will look at after, is one of the only tanks in the game that currently is not a nation. It's a nation that we still don't have in the game. We don't have any tech tree of these nations in the game. So it kind of sits on its own. So basically, the Ram 2 is a Canadian tank. It's actually a Canadian tank, the only Canadian tank we've got in the game, and I'm sure it will only be the only tank that we have from the Canadian tree. So yeah, the Ram 2 is actually Canadian, and if you do look at it in your garage, it does actually have the Canadian flag. So you know, they can do it, and that kind of thing makes me think, like, why don't they do it more then? Like, you know, there's maybe some nations out there that people want a certain tank. You know, they could be from that nation themselves. There might be a tank that they really love from their own nation, and they may ask Wargaming, like, why don't you add this tank? Even though we don't have the nations in the tech tree. Now, as I've said, we know that they can do it because we have this tank, and we have the next tank, which we're going to look at. So we know that they can do it. We know that they can add tanks from different nations. You know, it doesn't have to be in the European tech tree. It's like this tank. It's not really in any tree, really. It's a Canadian tank that's sitting on its own, basically. So again, you go back to your garage, and you head over to tier 5. It's a premium tank, and actually it's there in its own tech tree, but it actually comes under America. So it's under the American, not tech tree, but under the American nation, but you can see it has the Canadian flag. And as I've said, this isn't the only tank that we have that's from a different nation to what we're used to. So we also have the AC4 Sentinel, this tank right here, which again has been around for a very long time. Now, I'm not saying it's a good tank. I'm not saying it's like a wow tank, because to be fair, it's not. It's not a wow tank. It's probably not even worth owning. Now, the only reason really people will own this is if Wargaming give it away, or because they are from this nation themselves. So this is actually an Australian tank. It's got the Australian flag, and it comes under the Australian nation. So, you know, we know, again, I'm going back to the Ram 2. We know that they can do it. So Wargaming haven't done this for a very long time. Now, the Swedish tank I was on about is the STRV, the auto-loaded one, the 7A, whatever it is. Now, that's been around for years, absolute years. And, you know, it's always been a Swedish tank. And, you know, you was able to get it years ago. So, you know, they haven't done it since these days. This tank here was probably the last tank that they did of a nation that we don't actually have. And of course, it's the Australian nation. So, you know, are they going to do it? Should they do it more? And of course, I do think they should definitely do it more. Like, they need to do it more. Add other tanks from other nations. There's some Israel tanks that are supposed to be very, very good, but they don't do it. So another thing to talk about is not about the nations itself, is did you know that this tank right here was one of my favorite tier 5s back in the day, but you know, over time it's become sort of, it's weakened, not weakened really, but people learn how to deal with it. The KV220T. Now this tank I believe was in beta, and for some reason, now I've actually asked Wargaming this directly and never really got a response. Well, not really, I've never got a response, but whenever Wargaming sell this tank, they only sell it on certain, you know, servers. So EU server, Russian server used to have it, but Asia, I think Asian and the NA server, they never sell this tank. They have, especially, let's just talk about the NA server. They have never ever sold this tank on the NA server, and we do not know why. Like, what is so wrong with the tank, or what is up with the tank? Like, why would you never sell this tank on an NA server? You bring it into the shop in EU server, for example, but on the NA server you'll normally find the Panzer IV Hydrostat. Now I don't know why that is. I've no idea, because even the Hydrostat, that was also a beta tank that has been on every server. So it's not like they only sell the Hydrostat on the NA server. They sell that on any server. However, with this tank, they only sell it on the EU and what used to be the Russian server. Why? I don't know, because it's not like it can't be on that server, because one, I have it on my press account on the NA server. 2 years ago, Skate Extreme done a massive giveaway, and he gave away a few of these, and there were some NA winners who also still have the tank. So there's no reason why this could not be sold on the NA server. Like, it used to be an insane tank. Basically, it is a stock KV1, so the gun is shit, but the armor is basically a KV3 hull. So if you can angle this tank, nobody's literally penning you. Like, you will get bounce after bounce after bounce. You find yourself in against tier 4s, and you know, even frontally, behind, at the rear, the side, they are gonna bounce you. They're not gonna be able to penetrate you, only if they switch to premium round, but it's still tricky to penetrate you. So that's one thing I want to know. So are they ever going to bring in other nations, even though we don't have the tech tree? And are they ever going to sell this tank on the NA server and possibly the APAC server as well? Who knows? Hope you enjoyed today's video, guys. I'm meadsy69, and I'll catch you all soon. Bye bye.